Hi. I've been asked by some of you to say something about meetings and the conducting of meetings, and I want to include this as a supplement. It's not part of the regular syllabus for this course, but I hope what I have to say might be useful to you. As ministry personnel, we have to plan and conduct many meetings. Furthermore, we can also mentor lay leaders in their role as conductors of meetings. Now, generally, we cannot control the ways that others conduct the meetings they're in charge of, but there are a surprising number of ways in which we can influence the outcome, as well as doing our own leading to the greatest degree of effectiveness. And in these next few minutes, I want to suggest some ways we can do that. Think about some of the negative things that you've heard people say about meetings, or maybe thoughts you've had about meetings. When people say they hate or dislike meetings, generally they have three factors in mind. Meetings that appear to have no purpose, meetings that appear to have no direction, meetings that appear to accomplish nothing. Lack of purpose, lack of direction, lack of accomplishment almost always go together in some form or another. I want you to consider the next meeting you attend, or maybe the last one you attended. Even better, consider a meeting when you were in the chair. Ask yourself, did I know why we were meeting? And answering the question because we always do, or because this is the evening of the month when we're supposed to meet, is absolutely illegitimate for any group other than a social club or a support group. If you're chairing the meeting and you don't know why the group is meeting, then alarm bells should be going off in your head. So, step one in planning for effective meetings is to answer the question, what is your purpose for meeting, or what do you want to accomplish? Please note, that's not the same as getting your own way. Knowing the purpose is like saying we need to make a decision on Christmas Eve service. Getting your own way is, I want them to agree with my plan for Christmas Eve service. At least be honest with yourself. One of the learnings from the time of the COVID-19 epidemic may be that some of our meetings are not as crucial as we once imagined they were. We've discovered that we can get along just fine without them. So, do you really need to meet? Now, it's also important to remember that in some settings, meetings serve a social function. It's an opportunity for a group of people who really like one another to get together. And so some meetings have a social function. And if you are very task-oriented, that may very well frustrate you greatly. But you simply need to understand that it's important for your participants and modify your expectations accordingly. It's often wise to have a check-in time as well. Not only is that a useful piece of pastoral care, but it serves another function too. It allows people to separate from what has gone before in their day. And so if someone has had a bad day up to that point, there is a very good chance that the residual effect of that bad day will be reflected in the meeting in some way. So it's better to let them get it out in a controlled environment rather than to have it impact their participation for the rest of the meeting. Step 2 in effective meetings. If you know your purpose, what are the various steps for getting there? Suppose you know that you want the group to make a decision about something. Well, what are the steps that need to be decided before other matters? Are you clear on the decisions that you need and the order you need to make those decisions in order to be able to reach the final goal? Another question is whether or not this is the right group to be working on these issues. Do you have all of the information that you require in order to make a decision? All too frequently, we arrive at meetings ill-prepared. I've almost stopped going to meetings where things are sprung on me and a decision is required. If you truly want my input, don't ask me at the last minute. So, are there the materials that people need to have beforehand? If you have to make a decision, do you have what you need to do so? If you can identify a piece of information that is important to deciding, make sure it's there. So, for instance, if you want a group of people to decide on a major repair to the church building, do you need to have quotes there? Do you need to have answers to questions about those quotes? That makes it possible to make a decision without putting off the decision to yet another meeting. Is this the right group of people to make the decision? Now, it's fine to have a discussion, but you need to know in advance the extent of your authority. Are you the people to be making this discussion? Is everybody who needs to be consulted present at the meeting? Now, if you, as chair, know where you are going in the meeting, it's really helpful. If you can say, at least to yourself, well, first we need to deal with A, and then B, and then C, before we get to D, that will save people wandering around. And if you can tell the meeting, this is the order that I want us to do things in, then people will know how to make their contributions most useful. The reality is, very few people are naturally logical in their thinking processes. They need help to stay on track. And a clear agenda provides that. If you're the sort of person who always has ideas and you're always heading off in different directions, that's wonderful. But it's not helpful in chairing a meeting. A clear agenda helps keep us focused. Now, we don't want to make sure that the agenda is so tight that there's no room for something that you have not thought about. The Spirit may very well speak to someone, and you may want to incorporate that. But having a direction, having a plan, having a roadmap for the journey is really very helpful. And the larger the group, or the less familiar they are with one another, the more important it is that you have an agenda. If you can put time frames behind or beside each item, that can also be helpful. But understand that they are merely guides. There is a special term known as an order of the day. And an order of the day is when we, as a body, commit to a specific event at a specific time. So, for example, it may happen when we know that a guest is coming, or we know that whatever else we have to do, we must address this issue and we are going to start addressing it at this particular time. Other times that show on the agenda are merely guides. They're useful, but certainly not binding. Well, what about the rules of procedure, that seemingly arcane list of mysterious things that run a meeting? The extent to which you need to employ formal rules of order depends on the size of the group, the mood of the body, and the dynamics of the meeting. The more tense the meeting is, the more you have very conflictual points of view, and the larger the group, the more you may actually need to have rules of procedure and use them. I think that even if you are acting fairly informally with a relatively small group of people, it's often a very good idea to have actions, especially actions related to the expenditure of money, moved, seconded, and minuted. If we think about more formal rules of procedure, it's maybe worth noting that in the United Church of Canada, we follow Bourronot's rules of order. Bourinot. Bourronot's rules of order. Those are the rules of order followed in the Parliament of Canada, which are similar but not identical to the more well-known Roberts Rules of Order. It's important to recognize that the rules don't exist for their own purpose. The rules of order, the rules of procedure, are designed to help the body reach a decision. If we're simply serving the rules of order, then we're not using them correctly. The rules of order are designed to help a body reach a decision. Phrase it in another way, to gain clarity on God's call in that particular moment. And in the appendix to the manual, you will find them listed out for use in United Church settings. There is a logic to the rules of procedure, which, when you understand it, makes things a little clearer. An item is presented. It's moved and seconded. In other words, something needs to be on the floor. That's the expression used. It needs to be out there in the midst of us before we talk about it. And the way we get things out there so we can talk about them is to have them moved and seconded. Now, sometimes it's useful to have an idea open for conversation or a question being batted about prior to the moving. But it's really important to remember that it's the motion you are discussing, not ideas about the motion. So it's significant that you make sure that the motion actually says what you think it says. The mover speaks first. And it's usually about why people should support the motion. Now, it's often useful to invite questions of fact about the motion. These are not debates. This is not pro or con, but this is an opportunity for people to ask the questions that they need so that they know what the topic is about, so that they know what the words mean. Then open it up to discussion. The role of the chair is to keep the discussion moving, allowing everyone who wishes to speak the opportunity to do so. However, if you find yourself getting an endless series of speakers on one side of the issue, it's okay to stop the flow and ask, does anyone wish to speak to the other side? If everybody just wants to keep giving good reasons why this thing should be supported, maybe it's time to stop the discussion, call the mover to sum up, and then you vote. Be careful about interrupting people. You don't want to be too heavy-handed, but they do need to stay on topic. If you find that the discussion is getting out of control or people are going on for too long, you may need to impose a time limit. To say to people, okay, we're going to limit each person to 2 minutes. That forces people to get to the point. But if you're using a rule like that, you need to enforce it right across the board. The mover of the motion gets to speak last. The motion should be read again so that all are clear on what the vote is. And I, when I'm chairing, will often ask, if I have any doubts at all, are you clear on the question? And if anybody is not clear on the question, the motion needs to be read again. You can't go back into debate, but you need to be sure that people are aware of what they are voting on. Excuse me. You call for the vote. You ask for those who are in favor, contrary-minded, if any. Now, technically speaking, there are no abstentions called for under Bourronot's Rules of Order. Those who are not voting are assumed to have abstained. That's a little bit of arcane wisdom which you may not want to use, but calling for abstentions is not generally done in United Church circles. Now, it can sometimes be a challenge to keep things under control. If that is the reality, the speak once rule is helpful. People get to speak once to the question and no more, or no more until everybody who wants a turn has had it. The mover still gets to speak last before the vote. Now, sometimes there is a motion to amend. A motion to amend will change the motion that you are dealing with. A motion to amend needs to be moved and seconded. The motion to amend needs to say clearly what word or words are being changed in the original motion. Sometimes this is difficult to keep track of, particularly when you don't have a way of presenting those, say, on a screen. But you need to be clear. You have a motion, somebody wants to amend it. They need to be clear exactly what is being changed. Now, it can't change the intent of the motion, the original motion. The original motion, for example, is to serve vanilla ice cream at the Strawberry Social. An amendment to change that to lemon curd would be out of order. What would need to happen is that the body would need to defeat the vanilla ice cream motion and consider a new motion for lemon curd. Now, if the motion to amend were to say vanilla ice cream and lemon curd, then that would be in order because it's not changing the intent of the original motion. You need to vote on each amendment before moving on. If an amendment is adopted, it becomes part of the original motion. You can also amend an amendment, but that's as far as it can go. You can only have one amendment to an amendment on the floor. You can amend an amendment or a motion as many times as is wanted. Just remain clear on what is before the body at this particular moment. You as the chair need to be clear on what is being spoken about so that you can keep the body on track. Be careful not to get ahead of yourself. Relax and just keep the people to the discussion at hand. You may need to remind them a couple of times what we're speaking about. We're speaking about the amendment to the amendment. If you want to talk about the date for the Strawberry Social, that's another thing. Right now we're talking about this lemon curd thing. So think about it in this order. There is the emotion, there is an amendment, and there is an amendment to the amendment. Your order of voting would be you vote on the amendment to the amendment, and then the amendment, and then the motion. If in any situation, if either an amendment or an amendment to the motion is adopted, then it becomes part of the original. So let's take our Strawberry Social example. The motion is that we serve vanilla ice cream. Somebody proposes an amendment that we serve Scottsburn vanilla ice cream. That would be a motion that is in order because it's clarifying something about the original intent. A motion to amend the amendment would be to insert the words light. So you're now talking about whether or not you want to have light vanilla ice cream. If you vote on the amendment to the amendment and adopt that, the amendment would now be Scottsburn light vanilla ice cream. And if that is accepted, then the entire motion now reads, we serve Scottsburn light vanilla ice cream. You just add the bits and pieces. Now, if the original mover and seconder agree that the amendment, if in order, they agree with it, it may be considered a friendly amendment. At that point, it becomes part of the original motion and the discussion continues on the new changed motion. The original mover or seconder cannot be compelled to accept an amendment as friendly. So if you keep in mind the order of things, if you are clear in your head and you can help people to stay on track to deal with what is being discussed at this particular time, then you can be very helpful. There are some very clear rules in the manual about different types of meetings and how they can be conducted. There's also rules about such things as email votes. Please read those very carefully. One thing to note is that voting by proxy is not allowed within the United Church of Canada. The basis for that is that people need to be present to hear the discussion and the debate before they enter their vote. Sometimes during a meeting, the members of the meeting will call for the question. In other words, somebody will, in the midst of a question. This is only an indication that that particular member is ready to vote. It has no compulsion on the chair, nor does the chair need to wait for someone to say question before calling the vote. If the chair believes that all who wish to speak have been able to, then the chair calls on the mover of the original motion to give their final words. If a member of the body is insistent on an immediate vote, they need to move such a motion and have it seconded. A motion to move to an immediate vote is not debatable. It must be voted on immediately, and 2/3 of the body must agree. If 2/3 of the body agree with the motion for an immediate vote, then the original mover of the motion makes their final remarks and a vote is taken. If the vote to take an immediate vote is not successful, then debate on the original motion continues. And this is where you as chair need to be clear. To be clear that the body, first of all, is voting on whether or not to take an immediate vote. That vote has no impact on their decision about the original motion. If they vote to take an immediate vote, then you move to the motion. If they do not vote to take an immediate vote, then you carry on with the discussion. In either case, the decision about taking the immediate vote is not a decision on the motion itself. Sometimes groups like to work by consensus. That's something that needs to be understood. When we talk about consensus, what do we actually mean? Consensus, formally understood, means that everybody either supports the motion or can live with it. They support the motion or they can live with it. Until everyone is in one of those two groups, then the body cannot continue. If you are doing genuine consensus, then it could take a considerable length of time. In my mind, it's not legitimate to mix consensus and majority voting. That simply changes the rules in the middle of the game, and I don't think that's fair. If you're going to have consensus, then you need to be prepared to take extra time. You may, in fact, need to put over a motion to the next meeting, so somebody who cannot live with the motion has an opportunity to reflect on it. Consensus decision-making is very, very challenging in our society because many people are raised on the majority rules vote and method of making decisions. If you want to follow that method, be my guest, but please don't mix the two because you end up creating confusion and often bad feelings. It is possible in groups of any size to have certain matters simply be agreed. So, for instance, are we agreed that the minutes as circulated reflect the previous meeting? And if everybody agrees, then you can just simply say the minutes were accepted as agreed. It was agreed to accept the minutes as circulated. Similarly, with the agenda, are we agreed that this will be our agenda? So those are ways in which a body can make decisions without having formal motions. Another thing in Boronos, which sometimes comes in handy, excuse me, in Boronos you don't need a motion to adjourn. If in the assessment of the chair, all the matters that were agreed to have been dealt with, seeing no further business, the chair declares the motion adjourned. That may surprise people, but it's one less thing you need to have a motion and a debate on. So those are the basics of dealing with meetings, having meaningful and useful meetings, and some of the basics about chairing a meeting. If you have other questions about that, please don't hesitate to raise them with me, either in a class or individually. Meetings are important. It's part of how some of the work of God gets done. We can do them well and serve God and people in that way.